Hi, everybody. My name is Aaron Lint. My handle's Lintile. We're here today to talk a little bit about a problem that was elucidated over the last year, specifically about open source software. All of the projects that end up going out tend to utilize the good practices of componentized software. Many of them produced by the community, as well as some existing code from different sources. One last disclaimer: we are not McFly. Unfortunately, his train was late, and then he missed his flight. So we're filling this slot with a discussion about open source software. I'm the chief scientist at an application security company. So my team and I do a lot of research about the composition of software and how to keep it secure wherever it goes. So that's sort of my perspective on this. I'll let the fellow panelists here introduce themselves and sort of fellow companion. Well,
she told you were calling her out.
Oh, I mean, we'll have this fellow themselves. But just to kind of give their perspective on this, and then we'll talk through some of the issues and challenges that we've seen along the way. So, Tash?
Hi, so my name is Tash Norris. I am a senior cloud security engineer for Photobox Group, which is a European kind of photo management and e-commerce group of sites. So they own like Moonpig, you might have heard of, Hoffman, Greets, and some others. I work with quite a small security team for quite a large business across Europe, where I help with various, conversations with our engineering teams to help them build security. And that involves threat modeling, security architecture reviews, a whole range of stuff, quite often just education as well. And that's me.
I'm Mark Carney. In addition to being the organizer of this austere gathering, I'm formerly a pen tester at Sec1 Limited, also formerly a researcher at Security Research Labs in Berlin. I'm now a full-time PhD student at the University of Leeds. My specialization is hardware hacking. So when it comes down to supply chain issues, there's a lot to be said when it comes to the security of devices and hardware, and the way that we sometimes just don't, as alluded to, as we'll come to, we don't challenge the libraries that we're using with the SDKs. So my experience comes from a more offensive side, as opposed to Tash's blue team side. But obviously I've done a lot of remediation advisory work and all that kind of thing for clients and companies, as well as producing public disclosures and then public releases of things. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So I intend this to be a fairly informal discussion. If somebody's sort of in the middle of a rant or something, please try not to interrupt. However, if we come to a logical breaking point and you think it would be a good time for a question, I'm happy to recognize you, and we'll go from there. Everybody good with that? Great. I know we said we were going to start with Tash, but Mark, I actually sort of want to start from the red team side for the perspective. So when you come across a piece of software or a piece of infrastructure that has known open source components in it, just talk for a minute about the sorts of things that you look for as a pen tester or as somebody that's looking to, assess infrastructure.
Yeah. So when it comes down to it, once you've identified some, particularly for open source things, now we have, in many ways, improves the art of fuzzing. So the first thing I would do when I know...
Everybody on board with the concept of fuzzing, right?
I think most people will be, but to give you an overview...
You can just look at me in the eye, and I will... You don't have to raise your hand. I'll just point at the person and make you explain more about it.
So we've... fuzzing maybe 7 or 8 years ago was, kind of a niche thing, but now it's used everywhere. Everyone that I know, certainly, who's doing research of any kind, is au fait with how you do fuzzing and how you interact with a piece of software. And a lot of bugs can be covered off by having a decent fuzzing engine. American Fuzzy Lock AFL is a particularly well-known, particularly good engine. So if I know there's an open source component, one of the things I can do is find that component, write my own instrumentation, and then start actually fuzzing that component and then seeing if it actually applies to the product or infrastructure I'm working with. So when it comes to looking at supply chain issues from a pen testing point of view, if I identify something early enough, I will then use that information.
What about the process you go through to identify, so say you have a piece of software that sits out there, like maybe a web app, maybe some sort of API. How would you go about identifying that open source components are part of that?
So sometimes you can't, obviously. Sometimes you kind of guess. But other times you have good clues. There's often the clues in headers. With fingerprints, you can compare to. So a friend of mine's got like a library of fingerprints for different services and things like. So even though it says it's Apache 1.6, he actually knows it's 1. Whatever. So he and I have done some work on kind of trying to bring things together from that point of view. Other than that, it comes down to either an intuition or trying to work out, looking at the website, trying to work out, okay, so you've found this thing.
So one of my favorite, I'll interject here, one of my favorite tricks about figuring out what open source components are part of a piece of software is that knowing the licensure of the open source component is actually a big deal here because under certain licenses, the user of that software is often required to publish that to comply with the license somewhere, and so you can actually end up looking at the documentation of the software and figure out.
I will tell you that as well. Yeah.
So let's switch gears a little bit. As a company that obviously uses a lot of these in the products that you put out, can you talk about sort of your process with open source software and how you select components and any vetting that you do?
Sure. So,
there's a couple seats left.
with any group that's looking to use open source software, a key part is education and creating the right culture where our engineering teams can ask questions about the tools they're using and really understand what they're for. But also we receive the right level of support from security and operations teams to understand what they should be looking for, and what the opportunities there are with using open source software. I'm a great advocate of going with open source. I think that if you use it, you should contribute to it. But ultimately, why should we be investing in some of these really big companies and great tools when actually there's communities behind some really great projects? And I think that it generates a lot of collaboration with people you might not collaborate with. So I'm a great advocate for it. But there's a few things that I've seen a lot of across my career so far with open source tools. One is misspelling dependencies. I have a colleague who purposely wrote a malicious Python library specifically for Jenkins, and actually in the description put, "This is malicious, don't use it." And he created it for a talk that he did at DevSecCon last year. And he did it about 2 weeks before and was like, it'll, it might get a couple of downloads and it'll be a great talk and I can demonstrate this is ridiculous. 10,000 downloads later, in 10 days, he took it offline because he was like, actually,
sorry, guys.
It's really bad.
Sorry, what did it do?
I think all it did was just pull any parameters you passed to Jenkins, but we know that a lot of people pass credentials and their parameters, and AWS secret access keys specifically seem to get there a lot. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was good enough. And for me, it demonstrated that quite often we're in teams ourselves as security experts or security people, whatever level we may be. But our engineers are also in teams that push to deliver quickly and really fast. And often we're looking for tools that can help facilitate that. And we don't always have the right support to be able to understand what we're using. So having teams that are security teams that give great kind of, educational resources and training in bite-sized and quick chunks of things to look for. Make sure you're spelling dependencies right. Make sure you know where you're getting it from. So let's not be pulling them from some random bit.ly URL. Let's try and get it from the source.
You're saying Bitly isn't a good source of packages?
Let me send you some URLs later.
Yeah, no. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So training is absolutely an important thing, and education is really important. Do you do anything? Are you familiar with anything automated? Any sort of verification steps that you take as you put out software to make sure that it has integrity?
Yeah, so there's some great SaaS tools out there. So static analysis testing, specifically for looking at your source code. And there's some open source static analysis tools out there as well that will look at your dependencies. One of the things that it looks at, which a lot of people don't always think to do manually, is the dependency tree. So the dependencies of your dependencies. You might think that something is solid, but it's also potentially pulling in hundreds of other packages in some cases that create vulnerabilities or have vulnerabilities in them. So there's some static tools out there that will help to give a level of assurance to what it is that you're using in your code. Some of those will also help to identify future issues. So if you keep using those as part of your pipeline, you'll be able to keep on top of issues that come out in the future. We know that in 2016, we saw the summer of Carnage for WordPress. Some of you might be familiar. I think this is my favorite thing when someone asks me about using WordPress, especially in my last job, is pulling up the NIST CV database and just typing in WordPress just for giggles. I think there's like 1,800 odd CVs for it.
Something like that.
Just nod at me if you want us to talk a little bit more about what CVEs are.
So these are known vulnerabilities that have been published for a specific library or tool, and it's also a great way to check if you don't have access to a static analysis tool, you can just type in a library into the NIST database. It's just Google it. It's freely accessible. Even I think with the current government shutdown, you can still get to it.
Yeah, as the representative American in the room. Hopefully, I can get back on Sunday. But we'll see. Yeah, so it is still up. If not, there's the MITRE database as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you assess that? A question from me is: so how do you assess your upstream? Because there's a whole issue in, especially in hardware. One of the research projects that I did, I was involved in at SR Labs was the Baptizer Project, which was started by Jakob Low over there. It's now integrated. The output of that is now integrated into Snitch 2.0. And the idea of that was to find a way of assessing how well phone vendors in particular are dealing with patches from the upstream provider. So to give you an overview, for those of you who don't know about Android, because it's kind of a good example, and this happens all over hardware. Google don't make the Android necessarily that you have on your phone. They make the AOSP, the Android Open Source Project. Right? The AOSP then gets passed to chip vendors like Qualcomm, who create usually closed source drivers to make their baseband chips or their CPUs work or their GPUs work. And then that then gets passed down to phone manufacturers. So you've got another layer built in. And they add stuff. HTC has their HTC Sense, and Samsung had their own version of SE Linux, their Knox thing.
Oh, and if you saw
batteries,
if you saw the recent news story about the Samsung phones where you couldn't delete Facebook without using ADB,
exactly. You know, and then Samsung will then produce phones that are maybe tied to the telco. The telco will then add yet more apps, firmware, whatever, to make it work on their network with some other features. So there you've got 4 layers. And we found that it's actually really difficult to assess the upstream because it's not just a straight line. Like, the Apple, it's much easier. Because it's like, Apple make the hardware, Apple make the software, it's all in Apple, it's all in house, it's all there. Whereas Android is much more disparate, it's much more dispersed. And that is kind of the mess that you alluded to when you look at the upstream tree. So I'm wondering, like, what criteria do you have for assessing it? Like, at what point do you say, yeah, that's good, or what point do you go, no?
It's a good question. So fragmentation is a real problem in security, right? So this problem with Android that you're alluding to, where you've just got such a disparate use of tools. And we see it in industry a lot where we have network architecture is a good example of this, network hardware, and all the various layers, especially when you've got voice infrastructure at play as well. There's 2 parts to this. One is for the corporate law, having a great support contract in place, legally bind some of these people to keep in touch with you and let you know when there are patches. It doesn't legally bind them to release patches. But with Meltdown Inspector specifically, we actually saw that where they told us they were vulnerable. Publicly, Cisco did some tweets saying, actually, we are vulnerable. They did some that then said they weren't, and then that they were again. But that aside, they didn't actually release patches for a really long time. So one is having great comms open with your providers and knowing what hardware you're using. And actually, sometimes that can be really difficult for companies. So having that dialogue open with your network engineering teams, your hardware teams, whatever that might be, is a good part. The other bit, and I'm going to be a bit controversial at Security Conference here, you talked about at what point am I like, no. I think that there's another point, which is at what point do I consider what my risk appetite is?
Okay.
So depending on what that hardware is used for, what the tool is, what the software is, what company I'm at, there might be a point where I say, you know what, I can get 70% comfortable that I know what's happening, and I know that the company do release patches, but they take a really long time, but actually the tool is only used for this, and the value it gives me is this high, and I'm not regulated. So actually I'm going to accept that risk. And I think sometimes in security, I'm saying I'm being controversial because, you know, something that's 100% secure is probably not usable, but, you know, we love 100% secure. Sometimes you have to be really cognizant and realistic about the risk appetite, and that's a big piece for it. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to ignore that. That on the side, WordPress is really hard for me to get okay with.
Why is that though? Is that because of that ecosystem, because of the 1800 CVEs, or is that more of a...
I think for me it's a usability perspective, which is a usable, secure WordPress doesn't exist. You have secure WordPress or usable WordPress, and there doesn't seem to be a match.
The 20 shall be, yeah.
And I think that any great company or group or organization, open source or not, want to have something that's usable. And for me, that then introduces a tool that is incredibly insecure. So back to your original question of how do I make it happen? One is it's just great communication paths with the hardware providers. So I at least know if they have no fucking idea what's happening. So like I at least know what their level is. And part of that means that when you're looking at purchasing hardware or utilizing hardware is questioning them a lot. Third-party supply programs I've talked about a lot because it can be a bit boring, but part for me is really understanding what their technical capability is. Do they have a SOC? Are they aware of CVs or 0 days when these happen? But the other part is the risk appetite, like knowing at what point can I accept it before I get pushed to accept it.
Yeah. So that's a really good answer for things that you know are in your software. There's been a trend.
Can we have, by the way, a scale on a scale of 1 to WordPress, like how?
Yeah, exactly. The scale of 1 to WordPress and Microsoft Windows is a 5. So that's about the components that you know about, right? And from an organizational perspective, one aspect that you often see, especially when developers are under pressure or you're doing outsourcing, is components make their way in unannounced. Where, you know, there's I could implement this, or, you know, pull a random library out of the compendium. Do you have any processes that identify those sorts of anomalies?
I love this. So I feel like you know what I would want to say, which is I feel like it's really lining up to about threat modeling. I'm very grateful for that. So there's this thing that I love to do, which is break into things. There's this thing that I'm allowed to do now, which is sometimes break into things, but almost like theoretically break into things. So for someone that doesn't know, or for anyone that doesn't know what threat modeling is a framework or process I work through to, one, better understand an environment, whether that's theoretical, it's an idea, it's an opportunity, or it's something that's actually in production. I then kind of work through a load of different frameworks to understand what can go wrong. I then think about what can I do about things that can go wrong. And then the final stage is I validate, I write tests, did I do a good job? I follow a particular framework called Stride. There's loads out there. But I run through threat modeling. An example might be, so Phobox Group purchased a company in Amsterdam early this year, unfortunately before I joined, so I missed the jaunt to Amsterdam. But part of that company are looking to kind of migrate some business processes, but then also combine some business processes, which is really exciting. But part of that is exactly your problem, where we're absorbing a company that previously we had no knowledge of, that weren't part of our security culture or security environment and that tool set. So there's some things that they've got documented really well, but there's most things, as it is with any company, that aren't documented at all. And that's prevalent all the time. So threat modeling is a process I run through with some engineers, someone from operations, often project managers, scrum masters, whoever it might be. And I get them in a room together for anywhere between like 15 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how robust something is.
You love the goal.
And no, but I do sometimes provide pizza. So Zoe had it down.
Bribery is always an acceptable security technique.
And it's just a way to kind of have an open conversation. And I use framework and tools for people that aren't security minded to come up with threat vectors. But it's a way for people to air out possible threat vectors or talk about previous incidents and then work backwards to think of all the other things that could have caused the same incident, other vectors. So for me, that's been a really strong tool.
And then on the other side, as a pen tester, how does that threat modeling process come into your,
So, threat modeling for me is, I don't do it the way that you do it. Because my threat modeling is much more around, okay, what can I see in terms of a pen test? What's the scope of action? Sometimes I never get the complete view because I have a scope. I'm working to a particular statement of work. If I deviate from that, I can go to jail. Because it could be the Misuse Act. I do sometimes feel a little frustrated with that because I'm like, there's this thing here. There's a thing here. I can't touch it. But by and large, when I find something, I'm assessing it and I'm looking at the way in which I can, I'm always trying to work out what are you trusting that you shouldn't be trusting. Because ultimately, your threats come from some attack surface, which is the attack surface I see is the scope. And then I look at that and I go, okay, what malicious acts can I commit that seem to have legs, that seem to be able to work? And then I work to try and get a proof of concept. Mm-hmm. So I'm always trying to produce something that is useful to you guys, at least in terms of like the consultancy side of being a pen tester, to be able to say, right, I found this thing. It looks like an SSS, but then I'll try and say, okay, can I actually get a payload to find? Can I actually get any data out of your database that it looks like an SQL? And then when it comes down to identifying open source components, for example, then I will look at CVEs, and I have a tool that will just line up CVE. If I give it a version number, it just pulls down the data and just gives me blurb. And then it also cross-references, so you can download the exploitdb.com off GitHub. I actually have a chatbot, which sits on a Slack, where I just ask it for a CVE, and if it finds it, it'll just return the exploit as a file.
Love that.
Yeah, so because I can't always access things, but I can usually get my way to my own Slack. So if I can do that, then I have a robot that's just my little librarian, I can release that if people are interested, but I am very self-conscious about my code, so I might ask someone to go through it.
Slack seems to be like the easiest way to bypass any proxy.
Yeah, no, right.
Yeah, question.
So, Mark, we work in the pen testing industry, we're both consultants. I'm going to just slip on the non-ethical side of things because that's generally where we've come from. So from a non-ethical side of things, you were talking about staying within the SOW and staying within scope. If I want to slide outside of scope, which I'm going to, right? No one flame me for this, but I will look at your developers' processes and I will start following them through. So we've all heard of the LinkedIn episode, haven't we?
Yeah, you're leading me to the next place because we're really just wanted to talk about a little bit of case study.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
You've got the LinkedIn episode of I'll look at your developers on LinkedIn, what languages they're efficient in, what processes, what tools they use, what everything. Then I'll follow them on Stack Overflow. Now let's be honest, most devs want a solution, don't they? Because they go to Stack Overflow because they go, I haven't got a fucking clue what's going on. I need a solution. Copy paste. It's now in your code. So if I follow them and they're asking questions, I'll put up some malicious code on Stack Overflow because you can. They will copy and paste it, put it into your code, and then when they download the latest version of jQuery, it's not the actual version, it's my version, and I'll backdoor in your application. But I'm slipping well off scope, as Mark was saying. We are in the pen test world, we are ethical, we need to stay on. But there are guys outside those walls that are not ethical.
Yeah. The thing is, sorry.
What processes, I know you talked about Stride. I would use Stride on an offensive level, because we do use Stride in the offensive realm as well. Mm-hmm. I understand how you threat model against known attacks and stuff like that, but how would you threat model against that? About coming in from well outside, what kind of, you talk about really side channel based attacks.
So one of the tools that I've used before is using different attacker profiles. Adam Shostak wrote a book on threat modeling. I think it's a design-centered approach. It mentions this as well. I'm going to kind of get to where you're going at. I'm taking you on a bit of a journey, so forgive me. And it talks about, I use like a 2x2 method, or 4x4 method really, for my attacker profiles. I'm not going to say the names because they're simplified a little in my head and might sound a bit rude. But I effectively work through kind of different grade attackers. So we start on our threat model really simple, blue team aspect. We go through stride, and depending on the team's comfort level or experience, I might do this with the team or separately. Then work through different attacker profiles. So we might start with your script kiddie, someone that's just going to try stuff. A lot of the time it's reconnaissance-based attacks or pre-available scripts, SQL injection, stuff like that. It's useful to do because ultimately that's how TalkTalk was hacked. But we start to follow stride on that specific attacker mindset, and it's a great way to teach your engineers. I have 4 kind of rough profiles that I follow, so then I'll go for your, my next stage up effectively is a pen tester that goes a bit rogue, so it's someone that has more formal training or more formal structure and then follows those same available exploits, but more publicly available exploits, so still kind of white hat tools, but for bad. So these often we use our pen testers in these sessions to kind of say, well, what would they do and what would they do if they kind of fell off scope a little bit, and that happens. My next level up is hackers for money, so they tend to be more on e-crime or organised crime, and then your next level up is nation state. So it depends what I'm looking at. I talked about my risk appetite earlier. Often I might apply my risk appetite to the type of attacker profiles I use. It's not always easy to do in every threat model because most software engineers won't really think about those different types of attacks. A great SOC, a great security operations center will have people, or cyber threat intelligence teams will have people that specialize in this type of thing, and there's some information publicly available. I'm pretty sure the MITRE and attack groups have tools as well, and sample profile attackers. So stuff like that I use. Great pen testing companies and groups will also start to follow or give guidance on those type of attack vectors as well. Yeah, and bug bounty programs are a really good way to kind of help with that kind of thing. I know you're still given scope, but often your bounty researchers don't always follow the scope anyway.
Yeah.
Or really hardly ever. And we have a bug bounty program out there, and we pay out too.
What about if you're looking to extend your question, what about, that's really good on the predictive side, right, where you're trying to predict the capabilities. How about, in terms of mitigation or detection of these sorts of attacks, what sorts of tools do you use? What sort of processes do you use for that?
So I'll talk about what I can, because I don't want to, you guys are
I haven't done my job if I haven't pushed somebody to an NDA.
So there's some great open source tools out there that do things like log aggregation and then log interrogation. The thing I'm going to go kind of back to even more broadly, and thing I talk to, it kind of pretty much everywhere I've worked so far, is visibility is really key. And a lot of people invest money in these incredibly expensive and robust tools. We've already heard from someone who knows Splunk incredibly well, as an example, but you need to make sure you're capturing those logs first, and especially when we look at distributed architectures where we have multi-cloud environments or hybrid environments, collecting logs from every source seems to drop off the map a little bit. S3 buckets are a good example. People don't seem to capture logs from S3 buckets all the time, or Lambda functions, whatever it might be. Google Cloud has some really weird rules about how you capture logs, which makes it really hard. So visibility is something I would go back to first, making sure I'm capturing logs from every environment. And then log aggregation is really important to me. So I'm making sure that first of all I have a true sense of my logs, and I have a source of truth that I trust. And in Stride, we come back to repudiation. It always makes me think of a legal term, which is that which is decided is to stand. I want to feel like that with my logs, like they need to be precedent setting. So having a good log aggregate source. So I'm not really telling you what tools I use, but my process is capture everything, centralize, make sure I've got a source of truth, and then interrogate. And then I can build baselines. Then I can start to look at what I need to detect. I can work with publicly available information. The National Cybersecurity Alliance give a lot of guidance on things that you should be looking for. A lot of companies will share stocks, financial services share data, e-commerce groups share data. The e-crime forum is a really great place to get information on things you should look for. So baseline, and then you can write rules to detect. One of the things I love doing in threat modelling is writing BDD tests or tests off the back of the threats that we find so we can validate.
Sorry, can you expand that acronym for them?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So something called behaviour-driven development. So we write tests. These are human-readable tests. And when I say human-readable, not like software engineer readable. These are, forgive me, like project manager, business leader readable code. So you write tests. So a good example is CloudFront subdomain hijacking. We saw a lot of that last year across the whole industry where people were having domains taken over. Now, great, we're not vulnerable. And in a threat model, we ruled it out, but I don't want to just forget about that because we ruled it out. So we wrote a test to validate that we're continuously not vulnerable because we know engineers push code all the time. So we write tests. The reason they're human readable is I want our business leaders, our product owners, our project managers to understand what we're not vulnerable to. But I want them to write tests too because they don't.
So can I tabletop and something that I found? I think Matt Hall, who's also speaking up here, a really good friend of mine, he and I both found a thing, which was we were on, externally we managed to get a shell on the server. We found an encryption DLL. They had, I was looking at it, we're like, this looks a bit like Stack Overflow. What's going on? It wasn't encryption, it was encryption. So when we searched for that, when we searched for encryption, I think that's.
You're saying that there was a symbol inside the DLL, the name of the DLL.
Yeah, and then we found a Stack Overflow article how to implement AES in this language, and then when we looked at it, they'd actually preserved the key as well. They'd literally copied and pasted everything, including the key. Like, so not only a static key, not only were they messing it up like that, but also like it was a publicly available one. It was just there. Like, is there currently, like, how do you approach that kind of bomb? Which is a kind of an extreme version of this, whereby it's not even that there's malicious Stack Overflow code, it's just crap.
I feel like you've seen my emails from the last 5 years to like engineering teams.
Like, guys.
There are tests that developers can run locally. So I talked about BDU tests.
Yeah.
They're ultimately just regular expression checks. So AWS secret access keys follow a set format. You can write a regular expression that searches for that. And you can have a tool, a script that you run locally anytime you push code anywhere. Just Stack Overflow, Git, you can even get it to validate that you're pushing to your GitHub or your work GitHub, not the wrong one, because people do that too all the time. Local tests are just as important as your pipeline tests, your pen tests, security tests.
Also, check your Git histories as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah, they're I deleted it.
So yeah, exactly. There's been a few government departments where I looked at the Git history, and then I had to sort of email someone going,
hey, NASA.
That's no. This was a UK one, but it was one of those guys. Can we? And they respond really quickly. But it's also like, I don't know how long this has been out there.
This is something I in fact came across myself a couple of weeks ago. Where somebody posted something on GitHub that they shouldn't have, and if you don't know, you can actually roll back by commit. Yeah. Even through the website, so you don't have to even interact at the command line level. You can go commit by commit to find the previous state of things. Yeah. So if somebody did publish their source code to GitHub and then decided to delete it later, sometimes you need to be aware of that as you...
the thing is, though, is that when you do it to the website, like CSI Cyber, they look for the red code. Like, it literally, the bad code comes up as red. And the green code is the good code.
Yeah, it's true. But this actually is really relevant to open source software, because even if you update or remove that part from your publicly available code, a lot of times those clues are still in there for an attack.
Yeah, still lurking. Yeah.
So I think we were at that was a great question. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions while we're sort of in the flow of this? Yeah, please.
How do you deal with risk assessments and people's eyes going blank? And secondly, how do you get people to want to take ownership of whatever the system is?
Great question.
At the moment, I'm suffering.
Oh yeah, I know that pain.
Pizza.
The first one is, when I do a threat model, I really push for the owner of the application to be a part of the threat model. Like really push for it. The reason I do that, and I don't let them take their laptop to the room unless they're the one that's writing Jira tickets for the things that we find, because I want them to understand and comprehend what we're doing. The reason I push for the owner to come to the threat modeling session is there is nothing like hearing your own engineers say how unsecure something is. They're used to security coming along and saying, like, that's broken, but hearing one of their own developers give that message speaks volumes. It can be really difficult to get them in the room. I once had quite a struggle. I wanted to do a threat model on something that was quite large, and the team they'd had a lot of focus on them, so they'd already seen some vulnerabilities be exploited, and they didn't really want anyone else coming in and making fun of them, or making them feel bad, because threat modeling can feel a little bit like you're punching someone's baby. They work on something really hard and you just kind of beat the crap out of it, and it's not like that. You're exercising a muscle, you're building it up, you're making it stronger and more articulate and more resilient. I can be very persuasive to get people in a room with me, but ultimately I'm a bit sneaky. So the way I do it is I talk to a couple of people in the engineering team, and I kind of say, hey, how cool would it be if we got together and we had this session and you guys got some training? And I kind of create this Chinese whispers thing. So I'll chat to a couple of developers. I'll then put time in with the tech lead for half an hour, and I'll say, hey, this is what I want to do. I think it would be a really great idea, but go chat to your developers and see what they think. And then I'll chat to the product owner as well, or whoever owns the risk for that application. And I'll say, I can chat into your team. I think this is really valuable, but I want you to come and I want you to be a part of it. If you come in this session, instead of you having to respond to emails or risk documents from me, we're just going to try and cover off as much as we can in this one session, and then you know where you stand. The easiest way for me to ever frame it is being, again, really honest about that risk appetite thing. My role at the moment isn't to tell them yes or no, it's to give them all the information so that they make an informed decision, and ultimately so they're legally liable and not me. But it's so that they can make an informed decision and feel like they had the right support from me. I struggle with things like risk documents and risk assessments. I think once, because I had to write one for WordPress and it was genuinely 1,800 words long, because that was the way that particular project worked, and that they wanted everything documented. But I don't think anyone ever read it. So that's why I feel like threat models are much easier. Mozilla released an open source rapid risk assessment form, which is actually not that bad. And it starts to address some of those kind of risk questions. But mature risk programs are so varied and so fragmented. That you have to find what works for your company. And at the moment, I'm finding that kind of kinesthetic, that movement, that threat modeling in a room together seems to be the thing that works for me. I imagine, and I've got colleagues that come from BP, I imagine that they would feel more comfortable with a document that they can scan. So I think that there's no one right answer to that, but I'd be curious to see what you guys think.
You said something really telling when you started, which is, it's one thing to hear it from a pen tester, it's another thing to hear from your own developers. And it reminded me of a tweet from a few days ago from the Video Lab people, which kind of went a little bit viral in the info sector to see, which was, yeah, you security guys, you are just doom and gloom, and all you do is give us a cat, right? That is all you do. And it kind of made a lot of people sort of sit up and go, actually, yeah, so does anyone not know what I'm talking about there?
The VLC tweets.
Yeah, the VLC tweets, yeah. Okay, so, yeah, and that was like a different thing. It was HTTP versus HTTPS, and they had their own mitigations and things and whatnot. But, like, I think that was very telling that you said that it comes from pen testers. Do you find that the pen testers are just, like, setting fires everywhere and trying to fan them, or...?
Well, so naturally, our industry has always been built around, we give you negativity because, well, it's your choice to fix it. If you don't fix it, guess what? You're going to get spun. And I mean, I've been doing this for 17 years, and it's always been, I'm going to give you some bad news, and I am going to feel great about it. That really needs to change now. We're in 2019,
exactly.
10 years ago. How about we give you the bad news, but we will work with you to make it better now, rather than come back in a year's time. One, it's still not fixed. Two, we'll give you the same bad news. By that time, you've been really hit hard.
I will tell you that one of the techniques that I particularly use to wake up a couple of people in this area is that I actually like to demonstrate a win to begin this Saturday meeting. And I'll give you an example. In a previous generation of what we were doing in threat modeling, we identified a ticket, we mitigated that ticket, and it got pushed to production. And the nice thing about it is that part of that ticket, we actually had the one-line repro that was sort of like a very clear thing where I type this in and I get the shell back, and I have the ability to just demonstrate it. Look, this works. Well, I actually started that meeting in, kind of going back to your question, I started the meeting for the next rev of that update with showing, hey, look, this used to work and could have been really devastating. And I actually just put a terminal up on screen, pasted the command in, and then the guy in the room actually got a text from our monitoring system saying, this was a high priority thing, an attack, it happened from inside the building sort of a thing. So that force feedback of showing a win can be a very effective way to be like, listen, we're all trying to pull towards the same goal here, this is actually working, and it helps people get engaged. It's sort of like the sprint demo for anybody that's ascribed to agile methodology. I think about that as like the beginning of like a sprint demo to show progress and show movement.
So I've also come up on this actually. I've noticed that there's been a slight move in pen testing, and I'm wondering if we're going to agree that this should be a thing. I think it should be. In that I've found that certainly some pen tests I've been doing are to fit into a sprint to be able to do two things. One, build a relationship with the team, because they're all security experts. I'm a security expert. That's why I'm there, And, this guy's been tasked with fixing an XSS. Didn't even know what one was 5 minutes ago, potentially. And it gives them access to me in a more kind of personal way. But also, by doing that, it's not just a pen test a year or a pen test every 6 months. It's a pen test, but it's not really a pen test. Right. It's continuing security assessment. Exactly. It becomes a support network, and then you get emails like, we're going to do this. Does this code look all right? I think this might be broken. Can you tell me if it's broken? Then email 5 minutes later, I got an XSS, it's broken.
Like how good, I can attest for how good it feels to get those emails.
Exactly.
People that you've built.
Yeah, exactly. There's been numerous pen tests now where I've sat with dev teams or project teams and we've been going, right, I've done this. They're all sat around me. I explain what it is, what the risk is, how it works. 10 minutes later, it's fixed. I've got to wait a year, and they haven't got to get a report in bed saying you are shit. Because no one wants to see that anymore. They want to be able to work with the experts and say, right, we've done this. Can you test it? Yeah, I can still get it. You haven't changed it enough to be fixed.
You need to be doing this whitelisting. Yeah. You should be doing this approach.
So we, as pen testers, we know how we've broken it. We need to tell them how we've broken it, not just go, we found this, here's a screenshot, blah, 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 blah. Because it's just not helping anymore. And I do believe that we are getting away from that with that sprint methodology of we're going to sit with these teams more, with all teams more, and help them out instead of just turning up on site, sat on my own with a cup of coffee for a week, smashing the network, walking away, and then they get a nasty email from CEO saying your pocket quiet.
Well, if you'll allow me to say the sort of ranty comment, I think from my experience, the difference that you're highlighting here about relationships versus reports necessarily is the difference between security scanning and pen testing. If you copy and paste the report that comes out of your scanner, and that's the bad news that I think you're talking about, is that I've seen bullet lists, and that is about as effective as you've been describing. But once you actually start to integrate your own idea of threat modeling into that process as a pen tester and be able to communicate not just the fact that a vulnerability exists, but this is how it fits into the story, this is how it can be exploited, and these are the assets of the enterprise that are actually
My favorite indicator from the security assessment, the scanning assessment thing, is when you find that you can tell that the sentences like the consultant does not support IPv6, because the scanner didn't support it and they've just got this find the place, but you don't. Oh well. How do you deal with this? And what do you find works best?
Well, I do think it's interesting, first of all, that you talked about this kind of slight change in pen tester culture. When I first started in industry, I started as an architect, so not in the security team. I was so interested in security. And the company that I was working for had a pen tester in. I only know because I saw someone sat quietly with this kind of cool, 3 machines with them and some coffee and sat kind of a corner. No, they were in a suit. And I remember asking a friend in the security team, who's that? And they were like, it's a pen tester. And I was like, cool, I'm a bugger. So I kind of went and just sat near them and was like, hi, I'm a grad. I'd like to know what you're doing. And they were actually really cool and really recipient and kind of taught me through what they were doing, but only because I kind of I kind of pushed myself into their environment and was like, show me everything I want to learn. And for me, that was my first exposure to pen testers. I knew about other security areas. I liked doing, my degree was more in forensic security, and specifically cryptography was something that was really interesting to me. But this first time I met a pen tester, it was so interesting, and I learned so much just by sitting near them and asking them questions and bugging them, and probably put their report back by a few days. What I've noticed in a real change over the last probably 5 or 6 years is that they have gone from being kind of contractors or consultants that come in, sit in a corner so they're on the network and do their work, to being invested in teams. For me, when we do pay for external support for pen testing, part of that success criteria is that the engineers understand and know the vulnerabilities. And often that manifests itself in OWASP top 10 training, or really simple how to hack web application security training. And I think that's a really important piece. I think that you can't just, you talked about engineers actually understanding what cross-site scripting is, or buffer overflows, or secret injection, whatever it is. You can't just give them, mitigate this is the piece. You have to teach them how to create those attacks.
One of the most effective things that I actually ran for my company is I did a very simplified CTF with really awesome prizes for the engineers. And, not the complicated stuff, but actually just something which builds confidence in the fact that these attacks are really accessible and very visceral. And I think that's my biggest piece of advice, is that the more you can make it real to the people that you are serving in a security capacity, the better results you're going to have.
So we got to a point where we was pen testing a certain company, and they made web-based games, so food browser-based games. And we've been pen testing for about 6 months, when we're seeing exact issues across different areas of what they wanted tested. And we just said, look, this isn't helping. We've done 6 months worth of pen testing, it's just not getting across. So instead of doing the next pen test, we ran a 2-day web app hacking course. We taught them all of the stuff that we were finding. We taught them how to do it themselves. So they have a better understanding of what cross-site scripting is, SQL injection, LFI, RFI, all that kind of stuff. After that, when we went back to the pen testing, we weren't finding them anymore. Because they'd gone, I wonder if that. No, I've got to change that. And it was that mindset of understanding that security principle. And it does always go back to DevSecOps of, do your developers know how to code securely, or are they just copy and pasting from Stack Overflow? But there is a change.
So a friend of mine has a great story about someone coming and sitting next to him on a pen test. So can I observe what you're doing? And my mate was like, yeah, sure, sit down. So he sits down, and my mate opens up his email to get the scoping documents. And all he's doing is double-clicking on Outlook, double-clicking on a link. And this guy goes, are we hacking it? Thought that sort of the lights would dim, the lights would change, the hoodie would come up, the hacking commences. But I think that there's educating people. I've done a similar thing where we run into an impasse. So it's sorry guys, you blocked script alert 1, but script alert 2 worked. You blocked that, script alert 3. We can keep doing this, or we can come in rather than pay for the pen test. Come in. We'll do either some training or do some demonstrations, sometimes helps, where it's interactive. So they say, spin up a shadow copy of your production environment, which has this vulnerability in. I've checked it, put these things in, here's how it works, here's what we're doing, and I take them through the process. And once they've got that, so there's a couple of slides, there's usually, if not pizza, then there's some lunch later on or something. So that it becomes a kind of this, it's like an event in-house, which makes it slightly special. I think giving it a place sometimes really helps.
I think you don't have to be a pen tester to do this either, so I would not consider myself a pen tester or a red teamer. I like to think I know how to break into stuff, but like I'm not this level. But when it comes to kind of these threat modeling and the blue team and securing against stuff, I think there's still some really interesting demos. I talked about the CloudFront subdomain hijacking. When we realised we weren't vulnerable, a lot of people asked what it was, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about DNS. No one realistically likes speaking about DNS or learning about DNS, I think, but it was a good opportunity to demo it, and for me it was a good opportunity to kind of up my skill level in that kind of presentation and putting together like a hack. But our engineers learned a lot from it, and I think they learned a lot from it coming from different areas of their security team. If you're in monitoring, whether you're SOC, those types of areas, being able to demonstrate to someone, hey, this is what I see when this happens, or even better, this is what I don't see because no one's capturing the logs. That speaks volumes too, and I think that any area of security you're in, being able to demo and teach people kind of what it looks like from your perspective is really powerful.
All right, any other questions? Yeah.
Do you think the ability of a decent developer negates the requirement for a pen test?
I think it depends
The
on
question
your
is,
risk
do you
appetite.
think the ability of a decent developer negates the requirement for a pen test? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped in. I think it depends on your risk appetite, and also there's some regulatory pieces. So some compliance pieces might require a pen test or some form of, PCI is a great example of that.
I'm going to take a stronger stance and say no, primarily because I have a lot of experiential data and some analytic data that tells me that the same eyes on the same code over a period of time will give you a blind spot.
Yeah.
And so I think fresh eyes from outside is a very important concept when it comes to this.
I agree and possibly expand in the sense that I think that there should be more materials available so that we get more security aware developers that are accessible so that we don't find the low-hanging fruit. Like next year at this con, I'm hoping to have a big birthday cake for SQL injection because it was first discovered in 1998, released Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, in 1998 in Friar, was it? I think it was Friar. So it's 21 next year. I'm going to get a cake key in the shape of a key because it's 21, that's what you do, right? Like, seriously, we've had SQL injection, and it's a trivial vulnerability because the mitigation was in the original paper.
The moment I can not be able to use MS 08067 on anything, it'd be anyways.
Please, MS 17010 is the
Exactly. That's orange is
eternally blue.
Any other questions? Okay. Let's, as a summary, just a remind. I'll give you a moment to put this together. Just from the red team and the blue team perspective, one piece of advice, one takeaway that you want to make sure everybody has about this threat process, as well as remind everybody social media following and everything. So again, I'm Lynn Tile. My takeaway that I'd like everybody to think about is really just building rapport between the different parts of your organization. Literally coming down to the social ability to just go have a pizza, go have a beer with somebody and talk about what their experience is will ice over a lot of those things.
From my point of view, I'm Mark, I'm at Large Cardinal. I think the thing that I would say, if I could this whisper it into every company's ear, is don't be afraid of making security a thing that you take ownership of. There's nothing worse from my point of view where I have a thing, I want to help you, I want to disclose it responsibly, and I can't get an answer. It's a thing, if companies had good ways, and these are some excellent ways of doing it, to be able to take ownership of it, things automatically start improving. So I think that's what I would like to whisper.
So Tash at Tash J Norris on Twitter. Be a contributor. So if you're a security person, contribute to non-security projects, open source projects. Whether that's raise issues or PRs, do it. Find projects that you know your teams use or that you're interested in. You might not feel confident or comfortable contributing to their source code. Raise issues, spot things, run static analysis against it, help those teams out. And then, in contrast, encourage your software engineers to contribute to OWASP projects. So the Open Web Application Security Project, there's a Slack I can invite you to if you want, where we discuss all the things, all the dreams and hopes we have for all of the various OWASP projects, because our wiki is terribly out of date. There are so many things that we'd love to do, but I'm so conscious that it's from a security perspective. And these are not tools just for security teams, these are tools for our engineers. So we need contributors from security and from engineering teams. So I would encourage you to go out and contribute to these projects.
Great. Well, thank you for listening to our rant. We're going to be around for the rest of the conference. You all enjoy.
Thank you.